Story 1, The Manhattan Brownstone Game ****. I was 16 when the unforgettable incident took place. It was a Friday night in late September, the first genuine hint of autumn chill setting in across the city. My parents, both busy professionals, had decided to go out for a celebratory dinner with family friends in Midtown Manhattan and explicitly told me they wouldn't return until well past midnight. I had our entire, spacious Upper West Side brownstone to myself. I immediately called my neighbor and best friend, Leo. He was my age and lived just across the street. Typically, we'd retreat to our massive, finished basement to play video games or watch classic horror movies, but that night, we were restless and bored. Out of nowhere, Leo suggested playing hide-and-seek. It sounded ridiculous, a childish game for two teenagers, but we had played it before with a larger group, and the sheer size of the brownstone, combined with the dark, made it fun. We turned off nearly every light to maximize the fear factor, only the practical fluorescent light in the large kitchen remained on. The rules were simple, no going outside, and the attic or any restricted utility closets were off limits. The bedrooms, the basement, coat closets, and under furniture were all fair game. Leo wanted to hide first. I covered my eyes against the plush living room sofa and counted loudly to 50. I heard his frantic footsteps at first, then a swift, absolute silence that settled over the old house. I finished my count and announced, "Ready or not, here I come." I began my search on the main floor, checking the vast, open kitchen, but there was nowhere secure enough. I checked the hidden pantry door and then moved down the long hall. The powder room was empty. The grand coat closet near the front door yielded nothing. I started climbing the main staircase to the second floor. The old wooden treads groaned under my weight, and every tiny sound, the ticking of a grandfather clock, the rush of the central air, made my muscles tense. I checked my parents' huge master suite first, peering under the heavy four-poster bed and behind the dressing screens. Empty. I walked down the hall to my own room. Though cluttered, it didn't offer good cover. I checked my closet and under my massive antique desk anyway. Nothing. That left the large guest suite at the very end of the hall. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I pushed it slowly, bracing myself for Leo to leap out and scare me, but the room was utterly silent and dark. I stepped inside and scanned the shapes. I bent to check under the guest bed, empty. I flung open the walk-in closet door, empty. Convinced he must be in the basement, I headed back downstairs. I searched the storage area behind the wine cellar and the laundry room. Just as I was about to concede defeat, I found him curled up behind a forgotten stack of boxes. He burst out laughing, asking how long it took. I told him far too long. Then we switched roles. Leo counted, and I ran. I slipped back up the stairs and slid entirely under the large bed in the second-floor guest suite, pulling the thick bed skirt down to conceal me perfectly. My heart hammered in my chest as I lay there, waiting. I heard Leo come up the stairs a few minutes later, his footsteps slow, deliberate, and heavy on the wooden floor. He opened the bathroom door, then moved into my parents' room. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps came down the hall, pausing right outside the room where I was hidden. I heard him breathe in sharply as he entered the guest suite. He stopped right next to the bed. I held my breath until my lungs burned. His sneakers shuffled against the thick carpet. Then came a profound, unnerving silence. I was sure he knew I was there and was about to rip the skirt up. But instead, he walked out. I waited several more minutes, expecting him to call out and tag me, but the entire house remained frighteningly silent. Finally, I crawled out from under the bed. I went downstairs, expecting to find him on the living room sofa, but it was empty. I called out that the game was over. A strange, muffled voice replied from the basement, saying he was down there. I thought he was trying to trick me. I walked to the basement door, opened it, and shouted down the stone steps. He shouted back, louder this time, insisting he was still looking for me, and asked where I had been hiding. That was when my stomach dropped like a stone. I told him I was out, standing in the kitchen. A second later, I heard his fast, panicked ascent up the basement stairs. He stepped into the light, looking totally confused and slightly frightened. He asked how I had gotten downstairs so fast. I told him I had been under the guest bed the entire time. Leo frowned deeply and said he could have sworn he checked that room, and that he had heard someone moving inside. He was certain he heard breathing. I fiercely insisted I had remained perfectly still. We argued, then shrugged it off as nerves. We started another round, but I couldn't shake the deep, paralyzing uneasiness. Every little creak in the huge brownstone made me jump. While I was counting, I thought I heard a soft thud from upstairs, but when I searched, the hallway was empty. We kept playing until we were both exhausted. Then we collapsed on the living room sofa and turned the TV on. That's when we both froze, rigid with terror. From the second floor came a loud bump, like a heavy piece of furniture falling over. Leo asked if my parents were back. I whispered that they were still gone. The hair on my arms stood straight up. We sat there, paralyzed, waiting. The house fell utterly silent again. Leo theorized something had fallen off a shelf. I wanted to believe him. But then, as we sat straining to hear, we both distinctly heard it, the slow, deliberate creak of floorboards. The unmistakable sound of someone walking down the hall upstairs. We stared at each other, unable to move or speak. I whispered that we had to check. Leo immediately shook his head, whispering back, "No way." But I argued that if someone had broken in, we couldn't just sit there. I told him to stay directly behind me and grab the heavy brass fireplace poker from the hearth. We crept toward the stairs. The house was so quiet that I could hear the desperate rush of my own blood. The steps groaned loudly under our hesitant weight. When we reached the top landing, I pointed to the guest suite. The door was now fully closed. I knew, absolutely knew, I had left it cracked open. We stood frozen, poker raised. Then, from behind the closed door, came a sound, a slow, rhythmic dragging noise, like heavy fabric being pulled across the deep carpet. Leo whispered that we needed to run. I desperately wanted to, but the consuming mix of fear and sheer curiosity held me fixed. I held the poker high and reached for the cold, brass doorknob. My hand was shaking so violently that the poker rattled. I flung the door open. The room was dark, but the outline of the bed and the dresser were visible. Nobody was there. The closet door stood half open. I moved closer, Leo clinging to the doorway behind me. I yanked the closet door wide open. Inside were only coats and storage boxes. We both let out shaky, hysterical laughs, desperate to believe it was all our collective imagination. But as we turned to flee, we heard another sound. This time, it wasn't upstairs. It was downstairs. The sharp, chilling sound of the front door opening and closing. We froze again. Leo whimpered that someone was definitely in the house. My gut clenched with pure dread. We bolted down the hall and crouched, hiding in my messy bedroom with the lights off, the poker held tight. We listened. At first, silence. Then, faint, undeniable footsteps on the first floor. I wanted to call the police, but my phone was still on the living room sofa. We whispered about sneaking out the window, but it was too small to squeeze through. Our only exit was down the hall, past the stairs. The footsteps moved closer to the staircase. Then we heard the basement door open. The steps descended, one slow tread after another. We both gasped a silent sigh of relief. Whoever it was had gone into the basement. We took that split second to run. We sprinted down the main stairs, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the cold night air. We didn't stop running until we reached Leo's house across the street. His parents were home and immediately called the NYPD. The officers arrived quickly and searched my house from the attic to the basement. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, and absolutely no one hiding in the basement. They reassured us it was likely the old brownstone settling, or our imaginations running wild during a scary game. But Leo and I knew. We knew someone had been inside with us. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every creak made me jump, certain someone was in the hall. That was the last time I ever played hide-and-seek. Years later, that memory is still sharp, the sound of the closet door, the dragging noise on the carpet, and the deliberate footsteps. We never found out who it was, a burglar, a trespasser, or something far worse. All I know is that playing that night showed us just how terrifying it is to realize you are not alone in your own home. ## Story 2, The Eerie Woods of the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in a neighborhood that backed right up against the sprawling, dense redwood forests of the Pacific Northwest, specifically near Seattle, Washington. Our houses lined one side of a quiet residential street, and behind them, the massive, dark woods stretched for miles, unbroken. When I was younger, a core group of us kids from the street used to play together religiously every weekend. In the summer, we stayed out late into the humid evenings, sometimes until our parents' frantic shouts called us back inside. One of our most beloved, and most terrifying, games was hide-and-seek. We usually played in the backyards and extended the boundary into the shadowy edge of the woods. It was fun in the day, but at night, the whole dynamic changed. The huge trees completely devoured the light, and everything looked uniformly black and ominous no matter where you turned. That element of total darkness was what made it scary, and that was precisely what made it thrilling. The last time I ever played hide-and-seek in those redwoods was when I was 13. It was late August, hot and intensely humid, even after sunset. There were 5 of us, me, Chloe ***, my friend Mark, his little brother Noah, 9, and 2 neighborhood kids, Owen and Ben. We all agreed to play outside, desperate to escape the stuffy basements. The single rule was simple: hide anywhere in the yards or the woods, but you had to stay close enough to hear the seeker call the round over. Owen volunteered to be it first. The rest of us bolted into the growing darkness. Mark and I ran straight into the woods, splitting up once we were past the first row of colossal trees. I crouched low behind a thick, fallen log, my heart pounding a ridiculous rhythm, even though it was just a game. I could hear Owen shouting the numbers back in the yard, his voice echoing eerily through the humid night air. When he finished counting, everything went deadly quiet. Crickets chirped incessantly, and the leaves rustled gently in the light breeze. I stayed low and utterly still, a breath held captive in my chest. After what felt like an age, I heard footsteps crunching in the dry leaves. They were slow, deliberate, and moving between the trees, getting closer. I assumed it was Owen. I held my breath, waiting for him to pass my log. The footsteps stopped not far from me. Whoever it was just stood there. I waited for them to call out or move again, but they didn't. I felt a prickling sensation spread across my skin. I almost whispered to ask who it was, but the fear of losing kept me silent. Finally, the steps started again. They crunched away through the undergrowth, moving deeper into the woods. I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. I carefully peeked over the log, but it was too dark to see more than a few feet. The moonlight barely illuminated the massive tree canopies. I stayed hidden a few more tense minutes before my nerves wore thin. I crawled out and began creeping back toward the yards. As I walked, I heard Owen call that the round was over and everyone should come out. I hurried back and found the others already gathered in the yard. Owen had found Mark and Ben, but not me or Noah. Noah came sprinting out of the woods a minute later, covered head to toe in dirt, proudly laughing that nobody could ever find him. I told them I had been behind the log and almost got tagged when Owen walked right past me. But Owen looked confused. He insisted he never went that far into the woods. He said he only circled near the first line of trees before finding Mark by a fence. I squinted in confusion, then asked who it was that had walked by me. Everyone just shrugged it off, attributing it to an animal. We played the next round. I was the seeker. I counted loudly against a redwood trunk while the others scattered. When I finished, I searched the yards first, finding Ben and Mark quickly. Then I went into the woods to find Owen and Noah. The woods were quiet except for the buzzing insects. My small flashlight beam swung wildly through the massive trees. After a while, I spotted Noah crouched near a root system. I shouted that I had him, and he ran back laughing. That left Owen. I searched deeper, calling out his name. That was when I heard it again. The footsteps. The slow, heavy crunching moving in the dark, coming from just ahead of me. I shone the flashlight beam that way, but the trees were too thick to penetrate. I walked slowly, trying not to make noise. The footsteps stopped. I waited, now genuinely nervous. Then, I heard Owen call from behind me that the round was over. I spun around. He was already walking back to the yard. Confused, I asked if he had just been ahead of me. He said no, he had been hiding much closer to the house the entire time. My stomach twisted violently. Twice now I had heard someone moving through the woods who was definitely not one of us. I desperately told myself it was an animal, but the steps had sounded too heavy, too rhythmic, too human, to be a raccoon or a deer. We played a few more rounds. Every time I hid, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that someone else was out there, hiding with us. I kept hearing faint, unsettling noises deep in the trees, branches snapping, dry leaves crunching softly. At one point, I even thought I saw a tall shadow move quickly between the trees, but when I aimed my flashlight, it was gone. The others didn't notice a thing. They just kept laughing and running. I tried to act normal, but the nervous knot in my stomach was permanent. The last round of the night, Owen wanted to hide in the woods again. We all split up. I was done with deep cover, so I stayed near the edge, crouching low in the tall grass. I could see the faint, comforting glow of the porch lights through the trees. I heard Owen's faint voice counting in the distance. When he was done, there was silence. After a few minutes, I heard something that froze me entirely. It was whispering. A low, sibilant voice, too soft to make out any words, but terribly close. My entire body tensed. I peeked over the grass, but the woods were empty. I listened hard, but the whispering had stopped. A moment later, I heard the heavy footsteps again. They moved past me and disappeared into the dense trees. I lay trembling. Then, Owen called out that the game was officially over. Everyone else came out laughing, brushing dirt off their clothes. I walked back slowly, my heart still racing with fear. I told them I had heard someone whispering, but they all just laughed and said I was trying to scare them. I didn't argue, but I knew what I heard was real. We sat in Mark's yard after that, drinking soda. That was when Noah, Mark's little brother, suddenly asked if anyone else had noticed the man. We all stopped and looked at him. He said while he was hiding earlier, he had clearly seen a tall man standing motionless in the woods. He said the man didn't move, just stood there watching us play. Owen immediately told him he was crazy. Ben laughed it off. But I felt a wave of icy sickness because I believed Noah completely. We ended the night shortly after. Everyone went home. I lay in bed that night, staring at my ceiling, unable to sleep. I kept hearing the faint whispering in my head, the slow crunch of unseen footsteps. I never played hide-and-seek in those woods again. Years later, whenever I hear leaves crunch underfoot in the dark, I think back to that night. I think about the man that Noah said he saw. I think about the heavy footsteps that weren't Jason's, and the whisper that I still can't explain. When you hide in the dark woods, you truly never know who else is hiding right there with you. ## Story 3, The Intrusive Stranger in Silicon Valley. It was a scorching hot Saturday afternoon last July. I was 14 at the time, living out in a quiet, sprawling suburban area in the Silicon Valley, California, where properties tend to be large and private. My backyard was enormous, acres of manicured lawn, scattered fruit trees, and an old, bulky storage shed sitting right at the property line. My friends and I spent almost every summer day out there. That day, it was just me, Ethan, Sam, Jesse, and David. We were casually messing around, shooting hoops near the detached garage. We played for about an hour until we were all tired, sitting sweaty and exhausted on the grass, drinking water. That's when we saw a kid we didn't recognize walk up from the gravel service road that bordered my property. He looked about 16, clearly older and much taller than us. He had dark, messy hair and wore a faded gray shirt and jeans, which seemed odd for the intense heat. We all fell silent when we noticed him. He walked right up to us, acting totally familiar. He asked if we wanted to even the teams and make it 3-on-3. None of us answered immediately. Finally, Jesse asked who he was. The kid said his name was Kyle. He claimed he lived just up the road and was walking through the fields when he saw us. We exchanged confused glances. I had lived in this house my whole life and never saw this kid. Neither had my friends. But he acted normal enough, so Sam asked if he wanted to play basketball. Kyle shook his head. Instead, he suggested we play manhunt. He said my yard was perfect for it since there were so many places to hide. In that moment of heat and boredom, none of us thought twice about his comment. But in hindsight, that was a huge red flag. How could this complete stranger know anything about my private property? We all agreed. It sounded more exciting than basketball. We split into 2 teams. Kyle immediately volunteered to be on the hunting team first. He said he loved being the seeker. So, it was Kyle, Jesse, and David hunting, and me, Sam, and Ryan hiding. David kicked a soccer ball to signal the start. We sprinted into the yard while the hunters covered their eyes and counted. Sam took off toward the tree line. Jesse sprinted for the corner of the garage. I didn't want to hide near the woods yet, so I slipped into the old storage shed. It always smelled strongly of gasoline and ancient wood. I found a pile of folded tarps in the back corner, climbed under one, and lay still. I stayed under there for at least 10 minutes. Nobody came. I started thinking the hunters had given up, but then the shed door creaked open. The tarp was violently ripped off me in one quick motion. I looked up to see Jesse's smiling face. We walked back to the patio. A few minutes later, Sam was caught. Eventually, Jesse and David walked back. We all stood around drinking water, but Kyle wasn't there. At first, we didn't say anything. Then, David asked where Kyle went. None of us knew. We waited another 10 minutes, convinced he'd come walking back any second, but he never did. Jesse finally shrugged, said Kyle was just some weird kid, and left. The rest of us agreed, even though it felt incredibly strange that he would just disappear without a word. When the others left around sunset, I went inside. That's when I noticed something odd near my bedroom window on the ground floor. On the grass was a piece of thick, weathered rope. It was dirty and frayed, like it had been outside for months. But I was certain it hadn't been there earlier. I picked it up, feeling a knot of unease, and tossed it aside. My first thought was Kyle. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. But later that evening, I couldn't stop wondering if he had slipped into the house while we were distracted. My dad sometimes leaves the side laundry room door unlocked during the day. I went room by room, checking closets and under beds. Nothing. That night, I got ready for bed around 11 p.m. I laid there for maybe an hour scrolling on my phone when I heard it, soft footsteps outside my closed bedroom door. I froze. My dad sometimes gets up at night, but he always coughs or clears his throat. This was silent. Too silent. I called out for my dad. No answer. I sat up, my pulse racing. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I finally jumped up and locked it. I stood there, staring at the handle, waiting. After about 30 seconds, I heard the front door shut. The sound carried through the entire house. I didn't waste a second. I ran to my dad's room and shook him awake. He groggily sat up while I explained what I heard. He didn't doubt me for an instant. He grabbed the heavy flashlight from under his bed and told me to stay close. We searched the entire house together, every closet, the garage, the basement. He even walked the perimeter of the property with the flashlight, but he didn't find anything. We locked every single door and window after that. The next day, I told my friends, and they mostly laughed it off, sticking to the theory that Kyle was just a weirdo. But Sam admitted he thought Kyle was strange too, saying he barely talked during the game, he just stared at people. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., a distinct scratching sound woke me up. It was coming from my bedroom window. I froze, staring at the blinds. The scratching was slow, deliberate, like someone dragging a stick or nail against the glass. I couldn't stop myself. I carefully bent one of the blinds open just a crack. On the other side of the glass was a figure. I couldn't see his face, just the unmistakable shape of a tall person standing inches away in the absolute darkness. I jumped back and screamed for my dad. I ran into the hallway shouting until he came rushing out of his room. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his baseball bat and ran outside, yelling threats. He was gone for several minutes, checking the perimeter. The figure at the window was gone. The rest of the night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with the lights blazing while my dad stayed up, too. The next morning, he told me he thought Kyle had definitely been the one messing with us. He warned me that if that kid ever showed up again, he would call the police immediately. He said Kyle wasn't welcome anywhere near our property ever again. As far as I know, Kyle never came back. But sometimes when I'm outside at night, I think about that frayed rope by my window, and I wonder what he was planning to do if I hadn't woken up when I did. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.